They are looking everywhere right now, for who to blame when this all goes south and sideways, because it will, and really fast. And he's looking for the next immigrants. He's looking for the next trans people. He's looking for DEI. DEI seems to be working pretty well. You could blame it for the sirens you just heard in your audio. We have to understand that we have a lot more in common at the bottom and the middle than we do with those people at the top. They will never let you into their club.
Welcome back to Talking Politics with Mom, where I, a progressive millennial, talk to my formerly conservative boomer mom about politics. Now, today we're going to be talking about the three most horrifying letters in the English language, especially when they're said in this order. DEI. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Oh my. Let's get into it. Hi, Mom.
Hello, child.
So before we get started on today's topic, I was realizing that this is the first episode of the podcast we've done since Trump has actually been in office. It's been less than 2 weeks. What are your initial thoughts of this administration?
Oh my God. It feels like about 2 years.
Yeah.
You know, Trump is a con man and a snake. He's always been that.
Oh, shut up, silly woman, said the reptile with a grin. You knew damn well I was a snake before you took me in.
You know, you can't exactly fault him for that. A con man will tell you anything you want to hear, and they are so good at figuring out your weaknesses and what you want to hear. And then if you're desperate enough, you believe it. And then he picks your pocket and you're shocked. But that's what con men do. You know, don't exactly blame the snake for being a snake or the scorpion for being a scorpion. But I have to say, you didn't know that? He's everything that I was terrified of in the 1950s. Somebody who comes in pretending that he's going to fix everything that ails you. And then the real truth comes out. The snake comes out. I mean, he's basically turning America into a second-rate, third-world country where the oligarchs rule everything. Everybody else fights with each other for scraps. It's perfect for him.
I gotta say, I thought it was going to be bad. And it's even surprised me just how brazen his lawlessness has been in less than 2 weeks.
Well, he's doing that thing that what did you call it? The Three Stooges technique where they all try to get through the door at once. And so, you know, you can't figure out what terrible thing to talk about because he's got so many of them.
Right.
And that's deliberate. You know, he's throwing it all out there so you don't know what to chase. You don't know whether to chase the fact that they're arresting veterans who are U.S. citizens and trying to deport them, or that, you know, he's firing all the watchdogs in the federal government. You don't even know what the worst of what he's done is. It gets buried in all the sexier but not so significant noise. And that's deliberate. You know, he has very good evil people advising him, and he's at least listening to them.
So yes, there are so many things going on. It's impossible to tackle them all at once. But lately, there's been 3 letters that we've heard a lot about, and it's DEI. And I think the anti-DEI movement that Trump has embraced is partially distraction and also partially the harnessing of racism and sexism for other aims. So we're going to talk a little bit about DEI because it's been everywhere. It's responsible for the fires in LA. Trump just issued an executive order to get rid of DEI in every federal agency. And just today, he blamed DEI for the plane crash that just happened in Washington, D.C. recently. So before we get into what DEI is, what it isn't, how it's being deployed, what do you think is the big picture? Let's not bury the lead. What is really going on here?
Don't get distracted by thinking that it's all about hiring qualified people or kicking women and minorities out of the government. It is about that. If it was just about that, we've been here before. This is not the first time it happened. We came back in World War II. All the women worked in factories until they kicked us out and sent us back to the kitchen. And then in the 60s, those women's daughters said, And we stepped up. And I have great faith in the new generation of women. They're not fools. And because we are so incredibly qualified for so many things, we will come back. If it was just about that, it would be bad, but we could come back from it. But it's not about that. They're hollowing out the government. That's the plan. And as someone who travels to Central America, has traveled every year for 20 years, and seen firsthand what a government is like the one Trump is trying to create, which is basically take every qualified person out, whether you are white or black or male or female, as long as you don't pledge loyalty to him, you are out, because he wants to fill the government with sycophants and bootlickers. And that's the plan. And I can tell you what that looks like. That looks like complete incompetence, wasting your money, bribery, laziness, incompetence. And then when the government basically collapses because it can't do its job with all the nitwits he's going to put in, they are looking everywhere right now, for who to blame when this all goes south and sideways, because it will, and really fast. And he's looking for the next immigrants. He's looking for the next trans people. He's looking for DEI. DEI seems to be working pretty well. You could blame it for the sirens you just heard in your audio that were disrupting, your conversation. It was because of DEI. I'm sure of it.
Yeah, the DEI is under your bed. It's in your closet. It's actually it's right behind you right now. It's going to get you.
Yeah, it's in the traffic jams. Every time something bad happens, just blame it on DEI. That's what it is. That's really, it's doing very bad things because he's kicking qualified people out of a very big government.
Yes.
But look at the big picture. The big picture is the end game, which is to put oligarchs in charge and then say, you see how bad government is that we just kicked all the competent people out of? And this is the fault of, bad guy of the day. You can't blame trans people. There aren't enough of them. You can't really blame lesbians for everything. There are not enough of us. But if DEI is great. It's like magic words. DEI.
Yes, that's right. And the irony is
that's the plan.
He blames DEI for this horrific crash, but just this last week he had Elon Musk gutting the FAA.
Yeah, the agency that ensures our safety when we fly is being torn apart. And it's one thing if you have incompetent people trying to run the agriculture department and trying to figure out your corn subsidies or some damn thing. It's another thing when you put incompetent people in charge of life or death things, like fire departments, like the military, like the FAA, which is supposed to protect us. Yeah, people die when you have incompetent people there.
There are two sort of prongs to the way he's using DEI right now. One is to use it as a pretense to get rid of civil servants within the federal government, right? He sent these letters out to every agency, stop your DEI programs, along with everyone needs to come back into the office. And also, if you spot something that smells like DEI, you need to report it immediately, or you could face, consequences.
Well, let's look at what are they talking about when they're talking about DEI.
Yeah.
The first time I heard that, I was like, DEI. In Latin, that means of God.
Right.
Otherwise, I don't know. What does this mean? What is DEI?
So let's back up and talk a little bit about what DEI actually is. Within the federal government, this is the program specifically. It's an executive order that Biden issued, and it was a DEIA, which includes accessibility, executive order. And basically, it tasked all agencies with trying to understand inequities within their departments. Are you paying one group of people more? Are you providing more opportunities to one group of people more? Are there ways that we can encourage hiring in underserved communities? Can our federal contracts make sure that we're partnering with minority-owned businesses, for example? Are there barriers within our departments for accessibility, people who are older, people who have certain needs that, get in the way of them being able to participate in their job? It encourages things like, hey, maybe you might want to prioritize paid internships over unpaid internships, because as we know, unpaid internships are really only available to people whose families have the means for them to work and not be paid. So it's essentially about fairness. The reason it exists is because we have, of course, a history of unfairness where specifically white men have been given advantages and women and Black people and gay people and disabled people have been marginalized, underserved, and haven't been given as many opportunities. So this is sort of an effort to try and redress that harm.
Let me ask you this. Does it talk about people who aren't qualified? Does it say you got to put people who aren't qualified in to make everything fair?
No, you still have to be qualified for the job, but maybe your recruitment efforts include places that you don't normally seek out folks. A lot of the way people get hired is because they are part of a network, of people.
Yeah.
And so maybe you go into certain schools that have higher, levels of diversity and you recruit people there. You still are finding qualified people. The assumption of the people who are against DEI, of course, is that women and Black people and gay people couldn't possibly be qualified.
Right.
There are plenty of qualified people, but there are no requirements that you advantage someone who's unqualified over, say, a white man who's more qualified. In fact, if you did what this program suggested and looked at the pay levels for the same jobs, maybe you'd find out that, hey, the white men aren't making as much money. We need to make that equal. The idea is fairness.
Oh, yeah, well, when hell freezes over, that will happen. Okay, so basically he's saying, look, let's admit it. Let's be frank. White guys have ruled the roost like forever. And you're in charge. You're still in charge. And, it has unintended results. Even if you're the most broad-minded guy in the world, you tend to like people that you feel comfortable with, which are people from your own tribe. I see that. I've seen that my whole life because I have always been in a pretty male space. I've always played sports. I played active sports. I'm a lawyer. I went to graduate school with mostly guys. So I'm very familiar with that. And I kind of understand you kind of want to be with people that you feel comfortable with and familiar with in your workplace. But you know what happens as a result of that? You overlook an immense pool of talent that you just never considered before. And maybe it's not malicious or anything else. You have to wake up to that fact that that's just the reality of things. And maybe you need to broaden your outlook and say, you know what? As you get older, you find this is true, that excellent people come in every, age, race, size, shape, gender, ability. You can find really qualified people in every group and groups that you don't even think about. So you know what? You have to have that in mind because it looks pretty much like we've overlooked a lot of really qualified people and they just want a fair shot. So put them in the pool and give them a fair shot. And I think if you look at it that way, I don't see why anyone would object to that. because that's just the American way. You get the most qualified people and you find them wherever you find them. And that you find them in really surprising places. And so look for them and you'll get real excellence. I mean, that's fair. That's just the American way. You're supposed to be able to succeed on your merit.
The whole controversy about DEI is really, when you boil it down to it, about fairness and the meritocracy, right? We have this idea that America is a meritocracy. The best and the brightest and the hardest working rise to the top. Donald Trump has basically said, by rescinding this DEI executive order, he has brought back the merit-based system, a system of colorblindness. But the irony, of course, is that when you look at the people that he's putting in his administration, there's nothing meritocratic about putting Pete Hegseth in charge of the Defense Department.
Oh, I mean, it has nothing to do with that. It's just like, the con man saying, I'm going to do, it's going to be the most meritorious. You won't believe how meritorious it'll be. It'll be so meritorious. And then he hires his sycophants, ass kissers, and bootlickers. And that's who he hires. And for him, merit means, will you kiss my butt? And if you don't kiss my butt, you're not qualified. So, I mean, the sad message to all the MAGA boys out there who really thought that they were going to get their shot because they're very qualified, and I have no doubt that some of them are very qualified. That's not going to matter one spit in ocean. What's going to matter is whether you will pledge loyalty to the Fuhrer. That's the only thing that will qualify you. And if you don't, you're not going to get that job. And if you get the job, but you don't pledge loyalty enough, and you just want to do your job, it's not going to protect you. They will fire you faster than your head will spin. I mean, look at the collection of losers and nitwits and alcoholics and wife beaters and that he's appointing. We're back to the 50s on steroids.
In my opinion, the myth of the meritocracy is one of the more damaging myths in America.
I will say this. America is more of a meritocracy than a lot of other places, where heredity and class determine who gets the jobs. But mostly they look to only one group for the merit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they just assume, like an act of religious faith, that any woman who has a job is incompetent. They just assume that any man who has a job got there because he's competent, and then any person of color is really incompetent.
Yeah.
And that all the proof you need is what's their gender and what's their color.
The fact is that if we're talking about wealth, for example, as an indicator of success, the greatest predictor of whether you will grow up to be wealthy is very simple. Are your parents wealthy? You know what I mean? Capitalism and America in our system is more meritocratic than the feudalism that came before it, where opportunity was based on birthright. But I think there's a story that came out recently about a certain man who claims to have achieved all of his success through his merit, and that's Elon Musk. So Elon Musk is the richest man in the world. He claims to be an engineer. He knows about rockets and electric cars, and he has all these successful businesses. But not only that, I don't know if you knew this, but Elon Musk is one of the top-rated gamers in the world. In fact, he's ranked number 1 at playing a certain game called Diablo 4, and he was ranked 7th at playing a game called Path of Exile. So in addition to being the CEO of like 6 companies, he's one of the best video game players in the world. Except that it turns out that that was all bogus. He ended up going on a stream playing this video game, and the people who actually play those games realized that he had no idea what he was doing. And then it all came out that actually he was just paying people to play video games on his account to boost his number so that he would be ranked number 1 in the world.
So he has guys who actually are the best players in the world, and he's pretending that he's doing it.
That's right.
that sounds to me, it's kind of like stolen valor.
Mhm.
It's stolen competence. It's stolen merit.
That's
He's
right.
stealing the merit of these people and claiming it for himself.
That's right. Yeah,
There's a lot of
exactly.
that goes around. There's a lot of that that goes around.
Right. So I want to back up a little bit and talk about the origin of this anti-DEI craze, because I think it can be very instructive to trace this thing that's now being deployed in a way so that Trump can gut, the administrative state. Let's see where it came from and how it solidified. So I wrote and directed an episode for, Some More News, which I direct every week. And I wrote this episode about critical race theory a few years ago. So I've studied the growth of these ideas for a long time. This is
Okay.
basically what I think happened. You're looking at the summer of 2020. George Floyd is murdered in front of the nation. There's an uproar. People are out in the streets. And what was different about this moment is that it also included a lot of white people that were joining in those marches. This is basically the largest sustained protest movement in American history, is the Black Lives Matter protest in the summer of 2020. And what you had happen is that people realized that George Floyd's murder was just the tip of the iceberg in a much larger system of systemic racism. And so people started educating themselves. There were these popular anti-racism books, by Ibram X. Kendi. There was this book called White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, which I have some issues with. But nonetheless, people were trying to educate themselves. And also, there's a lot of pressure being put on corporations and the government to start addressing things. In comes DEI. You start having certain corporations saying, we're going to look at our hiring practices and we're going to, train people. A lot of it was corporate PR. A lot of it was like, come do a seminar and learn about racism. Not a lot of it was super effective because they weren't really making any systemic changes within their organizations. But some, organizations were more successful and effective at implementing this. Some of it was corporate PR. In any case, then comes the backlash. A man named Christopher Rufo starts seeing this, and he essentially starts finding the PowerPoint presentations of these training seminars, and he goes on a media tour lying about the things that are being taught in these courses. He's just lying about them. The things he was saying were gross distortions and lies. And then he notices that in the bibliographies of these popular books, some of the people they cite belong to a school of thought called critical race theory. Critical race theory, of course, is a legal term. It's mostly a thing taught in law schools. It started in the early 80s. It's nothing new. But he starts claiming that the background ideology of DEI programs is critical race theory, this sort of nebulous term. And he goes on Tucker Carlson and he says the entire federal government has been infected by critical race theory ideology and DEI programs, and creates this moral panic about this thing.
Tucker, this is something I've been investigating for the last 6 months, and it's absolutely astonishing how critical race theory has pervaded every institution in the federal government. And what I've discovered is that critical race theory has become, in essence, the default ideology of the federal bureaucracy and is now being weaponized against the American people.
Of course, they weren't critical race theorists. It was all made up. But then Trump invites him to the White House, and this onslaught, this demonizing of DEI and critical race theory in conjunction just continues unabated, relentless. DEI starts becoming branded as didn't earn it. And the basic idea of critical race theory and DEI, the way they define it, is that it gives unfair advantages to Black people, to women, that they didn't earn, and it's anti-meritocratic.
Oh, I like that. Didn't earn it.
Didn't earn it.
I like that a lot because every woman in my generation can bend your ear for hours talking about DEI men in the places that they worked, where the women were the ones who had the stolen competence because we were the ones that propped up these bozos so that they wouldn't get fired even by their cousin who ran the company because they were so incompetent. You know, they were full of DEI white men. That's hilarious. Oh, I love that. I could tell you stories about the DEI men that I encountered in my life. That's great. DEI didn't earn it. Well, see, the proof of that you didn't earn it is that you're a woman.
That's it's self-referencing, you know.
I mean, like, what is your evidence that this woman was hired because she's a woman? She has better test scores. She's harder working. She's smarter. She's got every credential in the book. And this guy didn't graduate from high school and is basically functionally illiterate. But he got promoted over to her. How does that work? Well, she's just not competent. And there's no evidence that you can produce to prove to me that she earned that job on her merit, because women inherently just don't have the merit of guys. And I have to say, that is so deep in the culture that even I have some of it. I mean, you told me a story once, a puzzle about a kid who was injured and he was treated by a doctor, and the doctor said, I can't treat this person. He's my son. And we had already learned that the father was out of town.
Mm-hmm.
But the doctor comes into the operating room and says, I can't operate on this person. He's my son. And how's that possible? And I had to sit there and think, how is it possible? You just told me his father was out of town. I'm married to a doctor, a woman doctor. And I told the story to her, and she had the exact same reaction, which is, how is that possible? I mean, that's the bias that we all have. Trump just found it and exploited it, and everyone else exploited it. And we need to get over, wow, slap me for that. I need to get over it too, but that's what they're doing. They're just saying, didn't earn it. A black person in that job didn't earn it. Woman in that job didn't earn it. White guy in that job definitely, probably earned it.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to do anything except look at them.
Well, yeah, and that's why the other part of this campaign, the anti-critical race theory, anti-DEI campaign, is an attack on our education. So the other thing that happened when Christopher Rufo started this panic is that you had these AstroTurf organizations of concerned parents that would go into school boards and talk about how the school was teaching all their kids critical race theory, and their white kids were coming home crying because they were being told to be ashamed of their skin color. Every politician jumped on the bandwagon.
You're hearing a lot about critical race theory. So what is it? This is
teaching kids to hate their country.
Teaches that America is totally screwed.
Critical race theory teaches children as young as kindergarten to be ashamed of their skin color,
which is nothing more than modern day racism.
Replacing the racism of the past with the racism of the critical race theory.
Ahistorical claims about our nation's origin.
Says the United States is rotten to its core.
Indoctrinating children.
You're either an oppressor or a victim.
And dumb as a bag of hair.
And of course, these concerned parents most of the time they homeschooled their kids, so they weren't even part of these school districts. But just everywhere you looked, it was critical race theory, critical race theory, critical race theory. Now it's DEI. They've moved on, but critical race theory is the ideology of DEI. Yeah. Just last week, Trump issued this executive order called Ending Radical Indoctrination in K through 12 schools. And it basically is this promotion of something called patriotic education. The critical race theory thing was really an attack on the fact that a lot of people were learning about the history of racial discrimination and the enduring harm that it still has today. In order for them to be able to get away with this idea that DEI is really about giving unfair advantages to Black people and women. You have to obscure the history of discrimination against those groups, because then that allows you to point to the groups that aren't succeeding and saying, we live in a meritocracy. Those people aren't succeeding. It's because they don't have merit. And it also allows you to point at Elon Musk and the rich billionaires and Pete Hegseth and anyone who is in a position of power and wealth and status and say that person is in that position because they earned it.
Except when they're Black or women. I'm sure they don't think
That's
Oprah
right.
women. I don't think they would say Oprah Winfrey earned it.
Right. Yeah.
Or Selena Gomez earned it.
Right.
You know. Yeah, let's talk about this racial indoctrination in schools. Let's roll back for a minute to when we were talking about why I became a right-wing fanatic. Do you remember that when I was 11 years old, I took a history exam on the Civil War, and I said that this abolitionist named Thaddeus Stevens was basically a terrible person because he forgot about the rights of the white people.
That's right.
Now, I was 11 years old. My parents never, ever would say such a thing. I got this out of my Catholic school history book that was probably written by some Southerner. If that's not racial indoctrination about how white people were being discriminated against 100 years earlier by people who wanted to help Black people, I don't know what is. That's a whole generation of Catholic kids learning that Black people got their whatever they got, which was almost nothing, completely unfairly because we forgot the rights of the white people. This has been going on forever. I find it insulting that he is trying to tell, California what it can and can't teach. He's telling Catholic schools what they can and can't teach. I'm going to tell you something. We're not going to take it. We're going to teach it anyway. And if you don't like it, I can say some words that I can't say on a family broadcast that I'd like to say.
Yeah.
But we're just going to ignore it because, if you don't know your history, you are going to repeat it. And if you don't know your history, you really can't understand your present.
I mean, we talked about this a little bit last time, but it bears repeating. They blamed the LA fires on DEI.
Oh, they did. Now that you told me what it stands for, it didn't earn it. I was saying to myself, I had to look into that. I was like, they said that a lesbian caused the fires. I'm like, I told that to somebody this weekend at a conference I was at, and she said, what? I said, no, that's what they're saying. And she's like, did I miss a sentence in there? Like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I'm just telling you what happened. Some guy on the right wing said that because the fire chief in LA was a lesbian, that it was all her fault. And then that story was picked up by hundreds of these little sycophants who have these fake podcasts and stuff where they just repeat their marching orders from the big bosses that tell them. Because I looked it up and I kept seeing the same language over and over and over on YouTube, and podcasts. I'm like, wait a minute, I want to learn something new, but they're all just saying the same thing word for word. So I like, okay, that's how it spreads. So I looked into this lesbian who caused the fires. And I was like, what is wrong with you causing the fires? And of course, it's ridiculous. I mean, I lived in LA. I love LA. It hadn't rained in LA for 7 months. They had a quarter of an inch of rain in 7 months. And this is a Cadillac desert. That's what they call it, because it's naturally a very dry, arid climate. So you have a dry, arid climate, you have no rain. And then if you've ever been to Southern California when the winds blow over the mountains, those winds blow off the desert. It's like walking into a blowtorch. And so you have hurricane force blowtorch winds drying everything out. Imagine what that would do to your cornfield or your garden. It would just suck every bit of moisture out of it. And then there was a spark, and they don't even really know what the spark was. It could be a transformer that fell down in the wind. They don't know. They're still looking. And once that happens, the wind just blows those embers everywhere. And the pumps don't work because the power company has to shut off the power to make sure that more transformers don't cause more fires. And the helicopters that drop the water can't do it because they can't fly in a hurricane. So I'm thinking, okay, unless God is a lesbian and caused this weather, it is not true that this lesbian caused the fires. So then I thought, why did they hire this woman in the first place? She's been there for maybe 2 years. And I looked into what the fire department in LA was like, and I thought to myself, oh my God, this is the most DEI place in the world. This is awesome that they think it's DEI. And like, you know what? You may have something there. Because I'm looking and I'm thinking, okay, they had virtually no minorities, no women. 50 years ago, it was so bad. 50 years ago, that the federal courts put them under a decree that they had to increase their diversity because it's a boys' club. You know, they know each other, they like each other, they want to be near each other and tell dirty jokes and racist jokes and all this kind of stuff. And they don't like women and they don't like minorities. And so they were very reluctant to do it. It was a very diverse environment of very diverse white men, many of whom were not qualified to do their jobs. So it's a perfect DEI situation. They're constantly being investigated because they're so terrible. There were like dozens of domestic violence incidents involving firefighters, you know, that they wouldn't report and that they would lie about and all this stuff. None of them ever were dismissed. As a matter of fact, that fire department basically never fired anybody, including a chief who was in charge of putting out another fire in the Palisades a couple of years ago, who showed up raging drunk. Did he get fired? No. They dragged out the whole thing until he retired before they could ever figure out what had happened. And he got $1.5 million from the fire department. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. One guy who left his post at, 911 so that he could have a little rendezvous with a prostitute. Another guy who was drunk on the job, another guy who's drunk on the job and got arrested and beat up a cop. I mean, it's just, I can't even tell you the number of crazy DEI things that happened. Did they have consequences in this meritocracy world? No. Maybe they got a little suspension. Almost nobody gets fired. Meanwhile, they feed dog food to a black guy, and they think that's just hilarious. They have racist texts that basically say, you can't get an interview. If you want to get an interview, you have to use basically shoe polish on your skin, and that'll get you an interview. I mean, just the worst possible stuff. So they're talking about DEI, didn't earn it. Excuse me? Look in the mirror. I mean, come on.
Yeah, so let's deconstruct this a little bit. Let's back up. So you have a moment of a racial reckoning, people starting to learn about the history, starting to recognize the existence of systemic racism and how it perpetuates. Then you have this backlash that says, no, actually, this is racist against white people. And the history that you're teaching is all fake, and we're going to make you start teaching. They started taking books out of the libraries and in Florida that would teach this, teach about this history. So suddenly the anti-DEI thing is now fully formed, and it's now an arrow in Donald Trump's quiver that he can deploy. It's, people get it. DEI, when the right wing hears DEI, they know what it means. They mean it's diversity hires. It means people who are black or women or gay getting unfair advantages. So now he can deploy that for any means he wants to, and he is.
Who paid for it? This did not come organically out of somebody going, gosh, this is so unfair. I mean, people have thought that hiring women was unfair for as long as I've been in the workforce, which is over half a century. We've always dealt with that. But somebody, I guarantee you, somebody put this to a focus group and said, racial tolerance is not a good value for America. We have to divide these people away from each other. What is the best way to do it? Is it this way? No, that didn't work. No one believes that anymore. How about this? No, we don't believe that anymore. But how about this? Try this deep sense that Americans have of fairness and unfairness, even though it's a very skewed sense in a lot of times. But they have this deep sense of fairness and unfairness. Let's talk about how unfair it is to people. And that's really good because people are getting angry right now that they can't make a living working a regular job. And we really, really need somebody to blame.
Yeah.
And I guarantee you somebody workshopped this and then tested the message in a focus group and said, this is the best way to do this. And then they funded it. They didn't just find it. They put dollars behind it, because I know that Moms for Liberty group is bought and paid for by some right-wing organization.
Yeah. And Charlie Kirk's outfit is a part of this too.
And that the group that spontaneously arose to oppose it, Red, Wine, and Blue, a coalition of progressive women and just women with common sense, and said, stop saying this about our schools and stop destroying our schools. That was not bought and paid for by anybody. That was funded by the women who said, that's enough of that. So the question is, who benefits? Who benefits so much that they would fund this phony baloney thing in order to benefit themselves? How is it that they benefit? By turning people against each other.
Well, the billionaire class's greatest nightmare is a multiracial, multi-ethnic, urban, rural coalition of working class people who say enough is enough, right?
Yes,
that
is true.
And the way that racism has functioned, the role that it's played in American history, in large measure, is to break apart these coalitions.
Right.
In Wilmington, North Carolina, where a successful multiracial community with Black and white elected officials that was thriving, you have a violent insurrection, a coup, a massacre that takes over that city, and there are no repercussions of it. Taken over by a coalition of white supremacists and rich landowners. Ultimately, the way we see racism deployed is a potent political weapon that is able to scapegoat a community for the benefit of the ruling class. And that's the same thing that we're seeing with this anti-DEI thing. The fact is that this anti-DEI push came out of a position of weakness. And it's
right.
The malleable nature of racism that it's able to adapt and jujitsu a moment of potential progress where people were opening their eyes. Now, wokeness is a dirty word. Critical race theory is a dirty word. DEI didn't earn it, giving unfair advantages to people. These ideas that started from a position of growing power of people saying, you know what? Maybe the system is really unfair and we ought to do something about it. Suddenly, they've turned it into something that's cringe-inducing and embarrassing. And actually, it's white people who are getting disadvantaged. But here's the worst part of this trick. If they are able to dupe some people and to say, hey, yeah, these people are getting unfair advantages that should belong to me. Guess what? Trump is not going to build a society where you're a part of that in-group. His in-group is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking to a smaller and smaller coalition of, as you said, bootlicker sycophants and billionaires who are all trying to hoard the wealth and power for that ever-diminishing small group of people that Trump decides are allowed in.
Well, they're doing a very good job of it. And I have to tell you this. It's like I told you before. Why didn't I change my views, as I grew older, faster? And the reason is the right wing had a much better story. They had a much easier story to understand. And the progressives have never come up with a simple, story that sounds like the truth. I mean, they come up with a very complicated story. And it is a complicated story, but really, it's a very simple story. You do the work, they steal your competence, they get the money, you get the crumbs. That's not fair. Stop blaming each other and look at the real reason that this is happening. That's a pretty simple story. Stand up for working people and make it your business to call out who's got their foot on your neck. Stop ignoring that. Truthfully, because we are in a class war right now. We've been in a class war probably forever, but really we are now, where the rich really want to get richer. And the poor are stuck, and the middle class even are stuck with the crumbs. And we have to understand that we have a lot more in common at the bottom and the middle than we do with those people at the top. They will never let you into their club. Don't even think about that. Even if you win the lottery, they won't let you in. You need to open your eyes and see what's going on. And, you have to understand you need to make alliances with people who are in the same situation and stop blaming them for the fact that the obscenely rich are vacuuming money out of your pocket while you're not paying attention. We've had some people who really understood this. LBJ understood it, Lyndon Johnson, because I have a quote right here that I've always thought hit the nail on the head, and you'll have to excuse the old-fashioned language. It's kind of cringing, but I'm going to read it to you anyway. If you can convince the lowest white man that he's better than the best colored man, he won't notice you're picking his pocket. Hell, give him somebody to look down on, and he'll empty his pockets for you. That's right. The Democratic Party needs to get its head out of its butt and understand we need fighters. We need people who will fight for us and that we believe will fight for us. Joe Biden fought for us, but he was such a bad communicator, nobody knew what he was doing. We need people who not only will fight for us, but will tell us and aren't ashamed to tell us exactly what's going on. That's what we need.
Yeah. And the fact is that when you have that analysis, then when you understand that racism and sexism is deployed really as a political weapon to obscure their true agenda, which is to loot and pillage this nation, essentially, then you can realize, okay, what they're doing, hollowing out of the federal government, does that benefit the people that voted for Donald Trump? No. They're getting rid of the infrastructure that could potentially curtail the excesses of the billionaire class.
Well, yeah. I mean, do you think Donald Trump thought of this on his own? I mean, he thinks about it, but he doesn't have the patience or the interest to come up with a plan. He just took that Project 2025 plan, which is full of very smart, awful people, and who had this whole thing planned out, to the point of compiling resumes of bootlickers ahead of time. They're just putting in the agenda of the billionaire class that they worked out already. I mean, does it benefit the people who voted for him? They're just useless tools. I mean, they are just useful tools to him. He's not going to do a thing to help you. He just took the cap off of insulin. Joe Biden put it in for all the geezers like me. I don't have diabetes, but a lot of geezers do. Joe Biden put in a cap of $35. Trump just took it off, and guess what? It's back up to $600. And some of them don't even believe that Donald Trump did that to them. Of course he did. Oh my God, that's the Democratic Party's fault, by the way, that they don't even know to do that. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. This is going to keep happening over and over. He shut down grants to everybody. And all of a sudden, America realized, including all the MAGA people, how many good things the federal government does for them. Meals on Wheels, fixing broken schools, feeding homeless veterans, housing homeless veterans, I could go on and on and on. All of a sudden, all of those programs vanished overnight and people were freaking out. Do you realize those programs were put in for your benefit by Democrats, mostly not by Republicans? And they were taken away from you by the guy who said he was going to make everything better that you voted for and you put into office. And one of the first acts was to take them all away from you? Get ready. This is just the beginning. When I heard about DEI, I thought, oh, this is the same old, that I went through my whole career. That they would look at me and say, affirmative action hire, not qualified. And I would just say, we'll take this outside. It's the same old. Our mothers faced it. We faced it. We overcame it. We could overcome it again. I think that that's probably true. I can't speak from personal experience, but I'm sure that minorities can do this, can go on that same journey again that they've been through. But it's not about that only. I mean, it's partially about that, but it's not just about that. It's really about destroying the American government and making sure that it serves the oligarchs and taking all the competent people out of it and replacing them with political people who don't know their head from their butt and whose main job is to be loyal to Donald Trump. And I don't care who you voted for, you should be very afraid. Because it's one thing to put an incompetent person in the agriculture department, but it's very different to put an incompetent person to head the most powerful military in the world or to run the agency that's supposed to prevent plane crashes, because then people die. And I guarantee you do not want to see the consequences of mediocre people in those agencies, because those agencies will fail very quickly and people will die, and it could be a member of your family.
We've got a long 4 years ahead of us. And when you see Donald Trump pointing the finger at this group or that group or the other group to blame them for America's problems, remember that's just part of the tactic that he's deploying to hollow out the federal government.
And you can do something about it. And the first thing you should do is make yourself a bingo card. And on the bingo card, you should put every group you think he's going to scapegoat. And just do that as a little exercise for yourself. You got your black people, you got your trans people, you got your gay people, your gay women and gay men. That's two. And then just play bingo. And then you'll find that you laugh every time you hit a number on your bingo card. That's one thing. And the second thing is, make your voice heard. There are a lot of good people out there who are doing things. Working Families Party, Seed the Vote. I mean, there are lots and lots of groups out there. We have to find them and not despair. This is the fight of our lives. We need to be ready for it. We've been called to save the country again, and we need to step up, every single one of us.
All right, Mom, I think that's a good place to leave it. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
All right.
Oh, I got something to say to all you people out there.
Yes.
First of all, thank you for watching. I didn't think anybody would ever watch this except people in my family who I harassed. So thank you very much. If you like it and it means something to you and you feel like it benefits you, I'm asking you, spread the word. It doesn't spread by itself like, I don't know, ink that you throw in the water or something. You got to actually do it. If you have a group that you talk to or on Facebook or whatever, let them know about it. That really helps us. And comment and like and subscribe, right? Isn't that right?
That's
Those
right.
three things?
Comment, like, and subscribe. That's right. And we have a Patreon.
Yeah, because Mr. Google really likes those things. And Mr. Google will send the word out if enough of you do that. So I'm asking you as a favor.
All right. Thanks, Mom.
Okay.
Mwah. One more thing before we go. After we finished filming this episode, my mom decided to do even more research into DEI and found out some really surprising information that shocked her. So we're going to be putting out an addendum to this episode sometime soon, so keep a lookout for that. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.